Hey everyone, Chris here from Varsity Gaming, and welcome to another rant video. I haven't done one of these in a while, but I felt it was time to unleash my frustrations about Siege in a video. Today's topic is one that I've touched on before, but we're gonna fully dive into today, is power creep, which is a term used in a lot of other games, especially MOBAs and card games, but in case if you don't know, it essentially means that new content coming out is just strictly better than older content. And it's a big issue in games, like I said, MOBAs and card games, because originality starts to run out at a certain point. Every game will start with some baseline stats they try to achieve for most of their characters or cards, and then after releasing new content over time, eventually the new stuff is just always on a better stat line than the previous stuff. And while this might not be wildly evident that it's happening in Siege, it is in fact happening. Just off the top of my head, I wrote down 9 different talking points that I want to go through, 4 examples of power creep. All of these are existing in the game right now. Some of them are much more severe than others, and some of them are being slowly fixed, but as of recording this video, they are still in the game. And since they're in the game, I'll still voice my opinion on them. And I figured, what better power creep example to talk about than one that's been discussed in the community for so long, is Buck versus Sledge. Buck was the first DLC attacking operator to be released in Rainbow Six Siege. And ever since he's come out, people have always said he's just a better Sledge. And for the most part, they're not wrong. Buck has a lot of advantages over Sledge. For example, he has range to his destruction. He's able to destroy surfaces above him, below him, from far away. He doesn't have to go right up to the surface. And he can also do this rapidly. Since he has 4 or 5 shots in his shotgun at a time, he can just spray them back to back to back and create massive destruction very quickly. Meanwhile, Sledge has to pull out his hammer each time and slowly hit each block. And on top of that, he's not nearly as vulnerable as Sledge. While Sledge has to pull out his hammer, hit the ground, and then pull out his gun after, Buck is able to shoot, make a hole in the floor, and quickly swap over to his gun almost immediately. Now, Buck isn't just universally better than Sledge in everything. Sledge does have some advantages. For example, he has more destruction hits. His hammer will last for 25 individual hits, meanwhile Buck will only have 20 buckshots. Not to mention, Sledge's hammer can also be used for more variety of objects. Buck is not able to destroy castle barricades with his shotgun or destroy Maestro turrets when they're closed. Meanwhile, Sledge can. And another important note is that Sledge never has to reload his gadget. He just pulls it out, hits it, puts it away. Meanwhile, Buck has to reload and sometimes won't have enough ammo to do whatever destruction he needs. So there are some advantages to Sledge. But in terms of destruction, which is for the most part the main purpose of their gadget, Buck does come out on top. When you're choosing which operator you want to play on the attacking side, you have to think of what operators are going to help you the most. If you're looking to play vertical destruction either from above or below, Buck will always be better, especially if you don't know what site they're going to take. If there's a possibility that they'll go on top floor instead of bottom floor, Buck is better. But however, if they go on bottom floor when you expected them to go top, Buck can still be useful. Meanwhile, if you take Sledge thinking that they're going to go on bottom floor and you want to break the roof above them, and it turns out they go on top floor instead, Sledge is now useless for vertical destruction. He can't do anything. He can't hit that roof. And seeing as how they're both 2 armor, 2 speed operators with frag grenades, there's almost no difference between their kits. The only real advantage Sledge has there is his gun, which a good Buck main is able to control a C8 anyways, and it won't really matter. So right off the bat, you can see how this type of power creep can be a problem. Yes, Sledge has his places, and yes, he can be useful on some sites more so than Buck, but more often than not, Buck is just a better Sledge. And now I'm not here to pretend like I know how to fix this, because honestly I'm not too sure. There are a few tweaks that I could suggest to make to Buck, but then I don't think he'd be as viable. And I know there's a lot of Sledge mains out there who will say that Buck really is not that much better and, Sledge can offer a lot that people don't realize. But the stats don't really lie. If you look at the infographic that Siege.gg released for the 6 Invitational from 2019, Buck was picked 39.9% of the time. Meanwhile, Sledge was picked 25.7%. While not a crazy 90 to 10% split, that's still fairly significant. In an ideal world, you'd want all operators to be picked almost equally. But the fact that Buck is picked 14% more of the time than Sledge is pretty evident of the fact that he is just a better destruction operator than Sledge. Now, I think we've talked enough about Buck and Sledge, but let's go on to some other operators facing some of these similar issues. Next, we're going to talk about hard breachers. This includes Thermite, Habana, and Maverick. This has been something that I myself have talked a lot about since Maverick came out. Now, just to be clear, I do consider myself to be a Thermite and Habana main as well as a Bandit main. So my bias will be a little more towards favoring Thermite and Habana's playstyle as opposed to Maverick's. Because Maverick is a direct counter to Bandit, and that frustrates the hell out of me, but I'll try to be as unbiased as I can in this analysis. So let's look at their gadgets. We have Thermite's Exothermic Charge, Habana's X-Kyro Pellets, and Maverick's Blowtorch. And I tried to sort these into kind of categories to show how useful they are in certain aspects. First category being the total time needed to destroy a surface. Habana's takes the longest as you have to shoot the pellets, then set them off, and they take quite a while to set off before they explode, making Habana's the easiest to destroy and stop as a defender, whether it be through Bandit, through a Maestro turret, impact grenade, shooting them, whatever. You have a lot more time to destroy them. Now, this isn't as much of an issue for Thermite, who has a much shorter time to destroy. He puts down his breaching charge, sets it off, and within 2 seconds, big hole in the wall. But even then, Thermite does not compare to how quickly Maverick makes a hole. Maverick pulls out his blowtorch and just immediately will make a hole with one small burst of his torch. But granted, it is not nearly as big, which is the next category, total destruction. Thermite obviously wins this because 2 of his breaching charges can open an entire triple reinforced wall. Meanwhile, neither of the other 2 can come even close to that. So Thermite has the most destruction out of all of them. Meanwhile, Habana has less destruction on walls, but more destruction on hatches. Thermite can only open 2 hatches, Habana can open 3. However, if it ever needs to be used for a wall, Habana can't really open too much. She can make either a crouch hole and a peek hole on the side, or a triple peek hole, or a walk hole, and that's about it. And then Maverick's a little iffy. It depends on how experienced the Maverick is, but an experienced Maverick is able to destroy either 2 hatches, which is equal to Thermite, or can open an entire reinforced wall if he knows how to do the trick, where you destroy the entire reinforcement on the bottom and the top, and the wall just disappears. So if you're a very experienced Maverick and know how to use him, he can have very close breaching potential to Thermite in terms of destruction. But if you use him for more selfish reasons instead of breaching, like trying to get a kill, he has much less destruction. Now let's talk vulnerability. This one was kind of hard to judge because it's very situational, but the way I described it was just using your gadget. Thermite is probably the most vulnerable out of all of them because when he wants to use his gadget, he has to pull it out in his hands, put it on the wall, and he can't do anything else while doing this. And then he has to run away and set it off. So while placing the breaching charge, he is incredibly vulnerable and can easily be killed. Now, Habana doesn't really have this issue because she can destroy them from a range. She can put herself in a safe location, shoot the pellets, set them off, and hold her gun out while the pellets are breaching. So she's much more safe. And then Maverick is somewhat in the same situation as Habana. He is less vulnerable overall because depending on what exactly you're doing, you can put yourself in a spot where you can't possibly be killed through the holes that you're making. You can still be run out on, and in that case, he's just as vulnerable as Thermite because he has his gadget out and he can't do anything. But in most cases of Maverick making a hole in a wall, you can't be killed if you position yourself properly. And the last category I want to talk about was counters. And like I've said about Maverick multiple times, this is tricky. It's dependent on who you're playing against, but in this case, we're assuming you're putting down your gadget and someone's going to try to stop you as you're putting it down. Who counters you? For Thermite, Bandit, and Mute can counter him. If they hear that he's about to place a charge, they can either put a Mute Jammer or a Bandit Battery down where the charge is, and it'll either destroy it or jam it. Cade is not a counter because even if Cade has his Electric Claw ready in hand, as soon as he hears Thermite placing the charge, it's already too late. The Electric Claw takes too long to deploy that it won't destroy the Thermite charge, assuming the Thermite puts down the breaching charge and immediately sets it off. So Thermite's only counters are Bandit and Mute. Meanwhile, for Habana, Bandit, Mute, and Cade are all counters, for the same reasons I just said for Thermite. Once they hear her placing down the stuff, they can put down their Jammer, Battery, or Cade Electric Claw, and it'll destroy or jam it. Assuming for Mute that you would put down the jammer and she didn't set off the gadget right away. So I'll add a little asterisk for mute. He is dependent on Habana's playstyle. And then lastly, this is where the power creep kind of becomes evident. Maverick has absolutely no counters. No operator can stop his gadget at all, which is where a lot of people have issues with him, like me. I really don't like that about Maverick. And not to mention the fact that Maverick's blowtorch is absolutely silent. The only time you'll hear it is if there's absolutely no sound at all on the map. This means not a single person is shooting, no one is making any noise, no destruction's going on, just absolute silence. Then you can hear his blowtorch. And honestly, Maverick's only redeeming grace is the fact that most people just use him poorly. If everyone used him properly, he would be a huge issue in this game and just destroy everyone. But luckily, most people are pretty bad with him, so it evens it out. However, he's still a very evident case of power creep. He is just, in almost every category, strictly better than either Thermite or Habana. So he is a huge case of power creep. Now I'll end this section here on hard breaching because I've already talked a lot about how Maverick is more powerful than Thermite and Habana and my issues with him. So I'm not going to get into huge details about it. But overall, you can see here that this is overall power creep. Now we're going to get into a few of the smaller categories that I won't talk too much about because I don't want this video to go on forever. One of the most recent examples of power creep is the new scope. This scope is only available to Gridlock and Capital, and is in every single possible regard just a better ACOG. It has the exact same magnification rate, it has overall less obstruction, the actual scope itself is much smaller on the outside, the casing, and the reticle and stuff inside is overall less obstructive. And it's only available on Gridlock and Capital, which I don't think is by choice. I don't know the inner workings of Siege and exactly how it's coded, but as far as I'm aware, I'm pretty sure that operators who share guns have to have the exact same attachments. So I think if Ubisoft could, Gridlock would be the only operator with this new scope and not Capital, which, like I've said, huge example of power creep. New operators getting stuff that are just strictly better than previous operators. If everyone in the game got this scope, I would have no problems with this. But the fact that one specific operator is getting such a huge benefit for no reason other than just being new is a problem with me. Which brings us into the next category, which is very similar to this, sidearms. So sidearms are facing the exact same issue with Gridlock's scope. As new operators are coming out, Ubisoft is just going fucking balls to the walls with their sidearms. It first started with Ella. Ella came out in Operation Blood Orchid. She was one half of the Polish operators. She had the first pistol in the game to have a sight on it. And in that case, she was the first operator to have a unique sidearm. I won't really say Cav counts in this category because it's part of her gadget, and it's a huge selling point of her kit. Meanwhile, for Ella, it's just her sidearm. There's nothing special about it besides the fact that it just has a sight on it. And then when Zofia came out in the next season, she also had this. And while it's not overpowered necessarily, it is still a prime example of new operators getting things that old operators aren't. And then fast forward 2 seasons into Parabellum, and you see Alibi and Maestro both getting this same special treatment. They got 2 pistols, both fairly unique. The revolver, which is hands down, no arguments at all, the best pistol in the game because of its incredibly high damage and very low damage drop-off. I think at a range, I'll quickly look up Rogue 9's spreadsheet to make sure, but I think at a range it drops down to 61 damage at the lowest from infinite range. That's really fucking strong. That's stronger than the DMRs in this game. And then their other unique pistol, which is the Bailiff, which is a shotgun pistol. Did not know those existed, but apparently they do. So again, DLC operators getting things that original operators will never have access to. And these sidearms are just strictly better than everything that the original operators have to offer. Now next up in Grimsky, we have Clash, who got both an SMG and a pistol with a sight. And this one, I'd say, is the weakest argument that I can make for the sidearms having power creep. It's because Clash doesn't have a primary weapon, so she needs something to make her more viable. If she didn't have any sights on her pistol or her SMG, she'd be absolute trash because it'd be really hard to hit a shot with her. So I'll give them some leeway here because it kind of makes sense. But again, just looking solely at sidearms, power creep. And then the last arm for sidearms that are pistols is Caden Nomad. Both of them sporting a very high damaging pistol with a fucking ACOG. Luckily it was nerfed, because originally at launch it was supposed to be 74 damage. I think now it's down to 54. This is just prime power creep. You can't really argue against it. In no way was it necessary that these operators have an ACOG on their pistol, especially one that is as unobstructive as this one. And there's really no reason for this. You don't see any of the previous DLC operators taking huge hits on pick rate because their pistols aren't better. It just seems like this is an unnecessary amount of power creep on sidearms. I'm fully expecting by sometime next year we're going to see a shotgun with an ACOG that can do 200 damage across the entire map as a sidearm. And this is probably one of the only categories where I actually have a viable option to balance it out and make it not power creep, is that you just remove all the sights from these pistols, except for Clash, obviously. And for Alibi Maestro, since it's not a sights issue, it's a power issue, just nerf them. Make them more in line with the other pistols. There's really no reason for sidearms to be this strong. Sidearms weren't really ever a defining factor for other operators. Why do they need to be one now? Which gets into our next category, which is sidearms that are not pistols. For sidearms that are non-pistol, the power creep has been slow but also somewhat evident. For a while before impacts came out, if you wanted destruction on sight, one operator had to sacrifice themselves to bring a shotgun instead of a SMG. Generally this was Smoke because he had the SMG-11 as a sidearm, so he had at least some weapon that he could use at a range and then use the shotgun for destruction. And then when impacts came out, shotguns weren't nearly as favored, but they were still somewhat useful, especially if you want smaller destruction across a couple of different spots. This way you don't have to bring 50 impact grenades, you just bring a shotgun. And I was perfectly fine with this because for the most part you're sacrificing some of your power, which would be your primary weapon, in exchange for destruction across the map. However, now with new operators sporting shotguns as secondary weapons, that's no longer really the case. Mozzie, Gridlock, Mira, and Jackal all are bringing secondary pocket shotguns, and we can also include Alibi and Maestro in this with their Bailiff shotgun. These operators all have pocket shotguns, meaning they don't need to bring a primary shotgun at all for destruction, which means that they are just directly better than operators before them who did, for example, Smoke. Obviously we're not discussing gadgets here because that would be a whole different wheelhouse, but just in terms of destruction, it really seems like there is no reason to bring a Smoke with a shotgun when you can just bring a Mira, have her still use her Vector primary, and then she has a pocket shotgun for all the destruction you need. So now instead of operators sacrificing their primary for destruction, now operators can bring their secondary and their primary and have destruction with no sacrifices to be made at all. I guess the only argument you can make for a sacrifice is that if they ever run out of ammo in their primary weapon, they don't have a secondary weapon that can be used at a range. So these pocket shotguns are impacting overall the loadouts that most teams would bring, and also having teams fully rely on certain operators being picked for that destruction. Instead of having to give up some resources or some utility like Smoke would, these operators have everything they need. So ultimately that's where my issue with these pocket shotguns lie, is that it's making other operators obsolete as you don't need them for destruction. And overall this is a really big problem for power creep, especially on the defensive side. Now these next few points we're going to really run through because this video is already turning out to be a lot longer than I expected it to be. Honestly, I thought it was going to be like 20 minutes. It's already at like 40 minutes uncut, so we're going to speed run through all these last few points. Now we're going to talk about global abilities for power creep, which I made a whole other rant video on, so this part will be really quick. Global abilities are really bringing down the skill ceiling in the game, as well as making operators who are far just too easy to play in general. For the most part, abilities put you at risk. You have some risk, you get some reward. Pretty simple. Someone like Thermite. The risk of putting down your Thermite charge and getting it destroyed, or even you getting killed, if that doesn't happen, you're met with the reward of breaching into sight or breaching open a reinforced wall. Someone like Doc, the risk of pulling out your stim pistol and trying to line up a shot and putting yourself in a vulnerable position on sight when an attacker could kill you, is met with the reward of healing a teammate or reviving a teammate that could help the team. These are skill operators that require some level of coordination and some level of risk to achieve a certain amount of reward. Meanwhile, global abilities just completely shit on this entire idea. This includes Lion, Finka, Dokkaebi, and to a lesser degree Jackal. Lion is getting nerfed, we'll get that out of the way, so he's not going to be nearly as powerful as he is right now. However, he's still going to be fairly strong. Because, like I said, 1, his ability puts him at 0 risk. 2, it reaps him a lot of rewards. 3, it doesn't take any skill to use. The same goes with Dokkaebi and Finka. And the reason why I kind of categorize Jackal separately is because he does have to put himself at risk in order to get the footprints. However, once he gets that, he just keeps reaping reward, reward, reward. And I will say overall it's nice that they haven't made any more global abilities since Chimera, but it still worries me about the future. Because so far Lion is the only one to have really been hit with the nerf hammer hard. And even then he's still going to be fairly strong. And the fact that Ubisoft does not want to change this is what worries me. They know how overpowered Lion is. They know how impactful global abilities are on the meta, but they want to keep them around for some reason. And what this worries me about is that in the future, more global ability operators will come out. I want operators that require some level of skill and coordination to use, not ones where you just push a button and everyone dies. That's not fun to me. Now, completely new talking point, we're going to talk about DMRs. This is something that has been talked about a lot in the community, so I'll probably be echoing a lot of their opinions, is that DMRs are getting pretty powerful the more new operators come out. At launch, there was only one DMR, Twitch's 417. There was Glaz's OTS-03, however, that at the time wasn't really considered DMR because I think it used to do like 150 damage a shot. It was like a one-shot weapon. But it also didn't have the thermoscope, which it has now, so we just won't talk about the OTS for this talking point. But then as the DLC is released, more DMRs came out, and all of them have been way more viable than the 417 ever was. We have the cameras, the SR25 and the MK14 EBR, which are all DMRs with equal or slightly less damage than the 417, yet they all have 20-round magazines, which the 417 only has a 10-round magazine. And since DMRs overall are on average 3 shots to kill from a distance, there's really no reason to ever pick the 417 over these other DMRs. Sure, at close range, the 417 will kill in 2 shots as opposed to the other guns, which might not, depending on damage drop-off. But for the most part, if you're using a DMR, you're going to be keeping yourself at a distance, not rushing in. And the only DLC DMR that really does compare to the 417 is the AR-1550 caliber, which also has a 10-round magazine. However, it is still better than the 417 overall. It has much better damage over distance compared to the 417, which drops down to, I think, 45 damage at infinite distance. Meanwhile, the AR-15 drops down to 50, and even the MK14 drops down to 51. So these new DMRs are just strictly better versions of the 417. And really the only thing that could be done to make the 417 more viable would be to give it a 20-round magazine. Now, granted, in all this discussion, Twitch does have one of the best assault rifles in the entire game. However, if you're someone looking for DMRs, and that's one of your strict and sole requirements, then Twitch is just not even an option. Her 417 is absolutely horrible compared to the rest of them, which concerns me, as I would hope that all weapons would be at least somewhat on the same level playing field, or that there's some balancing to it. There's no reason for a weapon to have more ammo or equal ammo and then do more damage over distance than another one. So there overall really is no reason why the 417 is as bad as it is. It's just what Ubisoft has decided. And it concerns me as DMRs are somewhat a lot more popular now because of the DLCs. On average, we're getting about 1 DMR every 3 seasons, which means that there will be more DMRs in the future, which are still going to probably be better than 417, and that's not good. Moving on to the second last point, anti-breaching. This is involving Cade versus Bandit versus Mute. This is arguably one of the weakest points for power creep, but it is something to discuss because it's basically the mirror version of the hard breaching. Now here's how the different gadgets compare to one another. For range, Mute's jammers have range. They can disable gadgets, drones, or whatever from a distance. Now Bandit has no range at all. His batteries can only destroy things that directly touch the surface that it's touching. And then Cade is kind of a mix. He can, 1, throw his claw, so he has range in terms of deployment, and 2, the gadget itself also has a range. so it can affect multiple surfaces and destroy gadgets on multiple different places. And in terms of what it does, is I kind of already talked about it, Mute's gadget disables, it doesn't destroy. Bandit's gadget destroys, Cade's gadget destroys. So Cade is kind of the in-between of the Mute and Bandit, but he's still somewhat stronger than both of them. And the reason why he's stronger is because he's now the only operator who can truly block hatches with very few counters. Previously and up until now, Mute has been able to block hatches. If he puts his gadget on the surface right below a hatch, generally can block most of it. However, it doesn't block everything, which means that the attacking side can still breach a decent amount. Meanwhile, Cade's gadget just completely stops the entire hatch from being broken, unless there's a Maverick, and the gadget is also very hard to destroy. And the only reason why Cade isn't just crazy power creep overall and not like the epitome of power creep is because his Electric Claws take some time to deploy. It can't counter Thermite, but it can counter Habana. And Habana is the main operator who gets hatches, so Cade is power creep in that sense. Alright, now we're on to our last point, and I tried to save one of the better arguments for last, but this is also an argument that I've talked about previously. Maestro versus Tachanka. I genuinely believe that Maestro is one of the biggest examples of power creep in the entire game. The reason why I believe this is because he is an example of Ubisoft seeing a problem and instead of addressing the problem, trying to capitalize on it. Now I understand Ubisoft is a company, their goal is to make money. I have no issues with this. However, Tachanka has been a meme since the beginning of the game. He is borderline useless and the worst operator in the entire game, hands down. People have been begging and begging for Ubisoft to do something about this, but they also want to maintain his identity. Now let's think, what is his identity? He has a turret and LMG. For Tachanka, those go hand in hand, but turret, LMG are his primary traits. Now what does Maestro have? Oh, he has 2 turrets and a primary LMG. Oh, Maestro is what Tachanka should have been. And that, for me, is a very big problem. I love Maestro. He is one of my favorite operators to play, as long as I'm not shitting the bed with him. But he is power creep incarnate. Ubisoft realized there was an issue with Tachanka. They realized people weren't going to play him, and they needed to fix him. And changing him into Maestro is a perfectly viable fix. However, instead of doing that, they just made another DLC operator for people to buy and to make money off of. So instead of fixing a problem, they just introduced a new person to take his spot. Because all the people who would have loved to have Tachanka as a viable operator would just play Maestro instead, because he is Tachanka, just better. And this type of power creep worries me, because there are other operators who are becoming more meme-based and don't really have a huge impact on the game. For example, someone like Castle, who is viable on a lot of different sites, but for the most part, in a bigger part of the community, he's considered a meme, because he's very easily counterable and not that impactful. I could easily see them releasing a new operator who does what Castle does, but better, and it'll be paid for DLC. Or grinded for. I should mention that you can grind for the renown, but most people either pay for the season pass or pay for the credits to buy them. So instead of fixing older operators, Ubisoft realizes that they can just release newer ones that are better. Now luckily they haven't done that yet. This is the only time they've done it, and I can let this one slip by. But I am very concerned for the future if Ubisoft decides to keep doing this over and over and over again for other operators. Now I know Ubisoft has turned a new leaf. They used to be considered one of the worst companies for greed and shit like that. And now they're a lot better. They do care about their games. They do care about their player base. But at the end of the day, they're still a company trying to make money, and power creep is one of the easiest ways to do that. So I am slightly concerned for the future of Siege if the power creep keeps continuing at this level. This goes for everything, not just Maestro versus Tachanka, everything in this game. As the game gets bigger, ideas are going to start running out. Ubisoft is going to have to either keep coming up with super extreme ideas that have never been done before and use those, or they're just going to take previous ideas / abilities that did make it into a game and just make it better. and then package it as DLC and sell it. Overall, though, that is my take on power creep in Siege. I don't think it's a dire situation that we absolutely need to do something about, but I do see it as a slowly creeping problem. And if left unchecked, I do worry that a lot of the base operators, or even some of the early DLC operators, are going to become completely obsolete because of this level of power creep. But that's all I have to say on the matter. I hope you guys enjoyed this long-ass rant. Sorry. In the uncut version right now, it's looking at 58 minutes. I hope it doesn't actually go this long, but I hope you guys enjoyed my ramblings. Please let me know what you think down below, at least on the state of power creep in the game, or if you disagree with any of my points. Again, let me know. I'll probably debate a bit. I won't be too active in the comments because the day that this video is supposed to go live, I will be moving to my new apartment, so I won't be on too much. However, I do like to hear back from you guys and let me know whether I'm crazy or you agree with my points. Usually those are the only two options in the comments. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.